Good morning. I'm hoping that Zoom is letting everybody in. I know it's got a bit of a slower pace, so thank you so much. We've started just 1 minute after past today. Before we begin today's session, I would first like to start with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, AQuant Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's session will be supported by Auslan interpreters and closed captions, both of which you can enable through your Zoom interface, and instructions on how to do this can be found in the chat window. At this time, and ahead of the panel starting, I would like to provide a content warning. Real people, real stories, real solutions is designed to be a raw and honest conversation around people's lived experiences as they navigate the corporate world. Topics that could be discussed today may include, but are not limited to, sexuality, racism, homophobia, mental health, ableism, and cultural sensitivity. So please only participate if you feel comfortable to do so. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Monique. My pronouns are she and her. I am a solutions director here at AQuant, and today I hold the very privileged position of moderator for our panel session. For those of you who know me well, you will notice that today my pace is a lot slower, my tone is consistent, my background is neutral. This is to ensure that the technology can understand me and that we are as respectful and inclusive as possible for all human needs during this time. This session is designed to resonate with people who work in leadership, HR, workforce design, recruitment, organizational development, and those who specialize, consult, or have responsibilities related to diversity and inclusion. However, we welcome anyone who wants to be informed and inspired by honest and genuine lived experiences from those who identify as being parts of the DE&I spectrum. Whilst we recognize that this session could have been held in person, we felt that it may have excluded a large number of people, those in remote locations, those who do not have access to funds to travel to conferences and panels, and those who do not receive paid time off to attend such events. Therefore, we made a bold decision to challenge ourselves, to utilize technology and attempt to be as inclusive as possible. But please remember, we are not perfect. And if I'm involved, something's going to go wrong. But without further ado, please let me introduce you to our fantastic and generous panelists and also highlight the charities that they are going to be represented today. We have Adam Manovich, and he will be supporting the Mali Accommodation Support Program, Mags Hanley with the McGrath Foundation, Ellie Watts for Black Aboriginal Corporation, Diane Moodley and doing Tong Abbey Legal Centre, and Nikhil Bora for Deaf Victoria. Now, I'm going to begin our session and hand over to Adam.
Thanks, Monique, for that very heavy intro on a Friday morning. And look, after being 2 energy drinks down and a coffee, I'll try my best to be slow, but my biology is telling me something else. So apologies for that. But yes, thank you. It's great to be here. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners across this wonderful nation. Happy Friday to everyone. And yes, again, it's great to be here. And again, I'll also second that part about things going wrong. So apologies ahead of time for that. But look, I've been asked here to talk a little bit about First Nations Australia, and you know, the organisers are very kind. They kind of give me a little forum to talk about whatever I'd like to for 5 to 8 minutes, and I shall do that. Look, I had a couple of really good discussions, and every week I question, I guess, what it is to be a First Nations person in business in Australia. And it's really changing, especially since Black Lives Matter in 2020. That was such a watershed moment for people of color, although I hate that term, but people of color across the world. It spawned Indigenous Lives Matter in Australia as well, which is its own movement for us. But more than ever before, Australian companies, organisations, sporting clubs, wherever you want to, art organisations, they're really valuing First Nations culture, people, contributions, and they really want to get into the First Nations space. Now, this is a wonderful thing. It warms my heart to know that we're kind of on the cusp of a massive change. And I'd like to think that in 20 years' time, we'll look back on the 2020s and say that was, a great period of change, such as the 60s is looked back really fondly in that sense, in some ways. So yes, more interest in First Nations culture, language, people than ever before. And this is definitely a good thing in Australia. I'm getting on a little bit now, and it might not look like it, but I am, or it may look like it. But I've seen a lot of change throughout my nearly 3 decades in the media and other organizations. And I just want to, I guess, impart 3 really easy steps in how to deal with First Nations people, culture better. If that's something the watchers out there, the audience can take out of this, then I would be really happy. And of course, I don't speak for all First Nations people. That would be ridiculous for me to suggest that, but there are some real commonalities that we face every day. And again, this is a positive conversation from my point of view, but I just want to impart some knowledge of things I've learnt, again, in my experience. So here we go. First of all, I think it's very important to have a budget and a plan. Now, this may seem like very basic, but it's true. What do you really want out of this as an organization, as a marketer, as a content maker, as a business? What are you doing? Is your bottom line in terms of goals to improve the bottom line? Is it to make money? Is it revenue? Is it to have a great outreach program? Is it to fulfill your RAP obligations? If so, why are you doing a RAP? I think people need to really ask themselves in organizations, and people of power in organizations, is what are we getting out of engaging First Nations people? And if you, I guess, reply to yourselves and say, well, most of it's just for us, then I think you're doing it wrong. First Nations Australians, we want honest two-way communication, sharing, learning. It's always been that way since before colonisation, and it's more important than ever before. So that's number one, is have a budget and a plan, and ask yourself the tough question: what do we really want out of this? Don't just be along for the ride. Actually be in there to make a difference. And I think you'll find that what you'll get in return is a lot better, just like everything else in life. Number two, be realistic. Don't expect the world. So many organizations, I think, come to Indigenous people and they want to change the world. A really good story is my daughter's school. They're planning their NAIDOC week, and they've got these massive plans. And, I had to bring them back down to earth a little bit and say, do you really think you're going to get Jessica Mauboy to come to suburban Brisbane for free? Like, do you really think that? Because Jess Mauboy is a artist that's built herself up to be one of the queens of pop, and she deserves a hefty payday, whatever she does, especially during NAIDOC week. And so I think blue sky thinking is great. Being realistic is even better, because if you have a budget and a plan, number one, and number two, if you're realistic, then you can actually make a lot more of a positive difference in our community, and also you won't get people offside. I think sometimes, even in business, I've noticed that companies can come to us at NRTV and say, we want you to make this. This is going to be fantastic. This is going to change the world, and we want to do this, that, and the other. And we're like, great. And recently I had a situation this week actually where a major sporting club came to us and said they wanted to make a video, and they weren't really paying for what it was, for what their idea was. They weren't really, they didn't have a budget and a plan. They just said they wanted this, NRTV will make it because they're Indigenous, because they're First Nations. No, it doesn't work like that. There's certain hard costs. People have to get paid. As much as we're all in it for the love of what we do, we all have families. So be realistic and come with a budget and a plan. The third one is probably the most important, and that's listen. And that kind of really relates to cultural competency, etc. Again, people ask me 1,000 questions. You know, what do you want to be called? Is it Garang Garang? Is it First Nations? Is it Indigenous? Is it Aboriginal? Well, yes, I mean, I guess all of these things, but just because I want to be called something doesn't mean, you know, the black fella X, Y, and Z out on the street wants to be called a certain thing. So don't just consult with one person, and actually listen. The moment that you consult with just one First Nations person to get, I guess, sign off on ideas or what you want to do, it's a very dark path, because it leads you down to a space where you're not consulting properly. And yes, we all have people that we trust. We all have common collaborators, but I think listening and casting your net wide is so important for the obvious reasons. Listening is the cornerstone of not only First Nations culture, but of humanity. The ability to listen to each other and the want and need to listen to each other in proper cultural exchanges is paramount. So they're the three things. I'm going to hand it back to Monique in a minute, because you know, we're all got some wonderful speakers here today. How better to deal with First Nations companies, people, culture, have a budget and a plan, be realistic, and listen. And I think if you do those three things, I think you'll be going in the right direction. Back to you, Monique.
Thank you so much, Adam. I think that was such a great way to make something that could be exceptionally complicated and difficult very easy to digest and understand. And I guess that's the real point of today. So thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to hand over to somebody I've known for many years, Mags Hanley, and she's going to talk you through her lived experience. Over to you, Mags. Oh, Mags, you're on mute.
Yep, I'm on mute. Okay, can everyone see me? Because at the moment I'm seeing one. Okay. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And I am talking more about my experience as an older woman in digital. Now, I've been working in digital now for over 25 years and have had to deal with, of course, being a woman in a IT male environment, but it is now, as someone in my Slack group would say, now I'm bringing in ageism as well. So what I firstly like to do is actually just show you the problems that we're dealing a little bit with some information. And the first one is, as you can see, the female participation in tech and engineering. And if you look at the second one where the career is, I'm in F. F is where the numbers go right down to 10%. And this was taken from interviews with 700 women. And one of the interviews is this woman came back and said, I love coding. I have a master's in computer science and I worked in tech for 2 decades. So many women like me, so many trained, and for what? It's hard enough being the only woman on most projects. Try being the only woman over 40. It doesn't matter how good you are, or even if your colleagues respect you. Eventually you get tired of being the odd duck. I took all my experience and started my own thing where I could make the rules. I'm never going back. This is something that I have seen myself, and I've been in this situation. But the other bit is that as we get older, women are considered less warm and likable. And this is a tired stereotype, but it is one, and there have been studies on this, about the difference between a woman and a man at the same age doing the same work, and where a woman is considered less likable and therefore less competent. And the woman who actually did all of these studies said, I'd hate for the message to be that women need to be more careful about their present themselves, because the findings already point that a woman has a narrower band of acceptable behavior. Now, the reason this is important, and this is from my own lived experience, is that I have been there. I have been seen as the ball breaker. And Amy Cuddy talks about women have this awful place where we have to be both warm and competent to be seen as something that we can get work down. And I've hated that I am considered the ball breaker, the one who actually has to sit there and put everything in line. And for me, this has come up the two different things I wanted to talk to you about. The first one was working and realizing that I wasn't part of the decision-making that was being happened. So in one organization that I worked for, there were two women who were directors, the equivalent directors, we were heads of. Me, I was director and head of consulting, and the other one was service management and managed services. There was a certain point in time that the leadership team decided that we weren't worth putting onto the senior leadership team any longer. And that decision was made because all of those guys were smokers, and they went downstairs and all the decisions were made there. None of the decisions were made up where we could be seen and we could actually have an opportunity to change that. And the reason I knew this was I had another friend who turned to me and said, I always go down there now, because even though I don't smoke, it is the opportunity for me to influence. And the second one is that I have been in places where an IT team has been told by their director to not pay attention because Mags is not technical. And the thing is, I've been working in digital for 20-something years. Of course I'm technical. But they were told explicitly not to pay attention to me. And this is a real problem, because as we move forward and we go through that whole cycle of having children, going back into work and trying to make our opportunities, and this is the exact right place that we are doing our opportunities in our 40s and 50s, we aren't considered warm enough and we're not considered technical enough. And it's because there are connections in with a group, usually of men, who are making these decisions. So I want to bring up just a couple of things that I'd like us to pay attention to. And in particular, if you are part of a senior leadership team and considering what you're going to be talking about with women of a certain age. Taking on the conversation that I was saying of the people going in and having the smoke downstairs, senior leadership teams. I don't want you to create male only or one gender only spaces for leadership to socialize. As I said, I saw that with the guys going downstairs and having a smoke, but they also did the equivalence of deciding that the social thing that they would do with the clients was motor racing. And therefore, the women weren't invited either. We know there are decisions that are being made in these social spaces, and therefore it continues to sideline women, especially as they are moving into senior leadership as well. I want you to consider how you're reacting to the senior women in your organization. Are they being penalized by not being as likable as you think they should be? As opposed to really looking at their skills, their experience, and the outcomes they are providing in for the organization. Senior women, we have to consciously decide how to develop these relationships and stand up to these biases. We may not be liked for it, but we are paving the way forward for these further generations. And we can see that the activisms of the generations coming up will be as interested as well. So let's us put forward. And I've got one last thing, which is senior male leaders. Don't focus on people like you to sponsor. I know it's hard and it's much easier if it's someone you can see in yourself, but broaden out who it is that you are going to spend time with and bring them up into the organization. So I'm going to hand back to Monique. You probably heard my bell there. That was my 8 minutes, and she will go forward to the next group.
Thank you so much, Mags. And just to think 25 years is not that long, you know, and to have to deal with that and face that challenge and fight, you know, and it's still present today. But thank you so much. Just a reminder to people in the comment section, please just use them respectfully. There are multiple people on the call. If you have direct questions, please feel free to use the Q&A, but please do be mindful. There are so many different people in the audience today. I am now going to pass over to somebody I've had the privilege of getting to know during this process and this panel, and that is Ellie.
Thanks, Monique. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Ellie Watts. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I'm a Senior Relationship Manager with Pride and Diversity. I'm coming to you today from the beautiful land of the Yuggera people in Meanjin or Brisbane. I've also been very lucky to spend the last 2 weeks on Gadigal land in Sydney for World Pride, and I previously lived for 7 years on Wurundjeri land in Naarm or Melbourne. I would like to pay my respect to all elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any First Nations people who are joining us today. Again, very grateful that folks have chosen to spend their morning with us, and I'm very excited to be part of this discussion, and really just want to thank Adam and Mags for sharing what they have so far. A little bit of a tough act to follow, but I'll see what I can do. So for myself, I am bisexual, I'm non-binary, and I have ADHD. So you could say that I am a triple threat. I've also been described by some folks close to me as being annoyingly bisexual, non-binary, finery, and neurospicy. So I kind of like to, you know, throw those in there as well. I'm very fortunate to work for Pride and Diversity. We are the only LGBTQ not-for-profit organisation in Australia that supports workplaces on their journey in LGBTQ inclusion. My role as a Senior Relationship Manager, I get to wear many hats in the role, which is fantastic. I get to do a lot of training. I work with organisations around their inclusive policies, strategy, their LGBTQ network, executive engagement, and also, I guess, some professional pun making in there sometimes and part-time stand-up comedy. So I really love what I get to do. And again, always very fortunate that I get to have these conversations with folks. So thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to talk probably a bit more of a very personal side this morning and how that relates to, I guess, how I've had to navigate my identities in the workplace. So for me, I grew up in regional Queensland in the Lockyer Valley in a very small country town. And as I was growing up and going, you know, through puberty and as a teenager, I always felt like I didn't fit in. And it took me a very long time to work out why that was. Whether it was because I had an older sister who was 9 years older than me, she moved out of home when she was 18, and I was kind of that only child and kind of, you know, on my own. Was it because I didn't have the language or the role models or any type of visibility to describe what I was feeling in regards to, you know, questioning my sexuality, you know, questioning, you know, was I bisexual enough? Was I, you know, gay enough? Was I, you know, was I too straight to kind of fit into that community? As I said, I grew up in a fairly small country town, so there was a distinct lack of any type of, queer visibility, of, non-binary folks, of trans folks. I didn't even know what the term non-binary was until probably 5 or 6 years ago. And particularly through my role at Pride Diversity, I've learned so much about myself as well as the community through this work. So that's been a really fantastic experience for me and my journey. But for the longest time, I felt like I didn't fit in. I guess was able to pass or mask as, someone who could fit in and had a good circle of friends. I was very involved in sport and things like that. I was the weird horse girl for a bit. So I used to compete competitively in dressage for over 10 years, and always kind of found myself on the outer edges of everything. As I said, had a great group of friends, but I always felt like I didn't quite fit in. And it took a very long time for me to see any type of positive representation of bisexuality, particularly in the media. And that's something that I could talk on for hours on end about the representation or the lack of representation of not just bisexual or bi+ folks, but LGBTQ folks in general. And the types of representation and visibility that I was seeing of bisexual folks in the media and through TV shows and storylines is that, we're greedy, we're cheating, we're promiscuous and things like that. And I was like, well, that's not, where do I kind of see myself? And it took until I think I was 21 to see my first positive representation of bisexuality in the media. It was through a show called Orphan Black, and it was where the character was describing bisexuality about being a spectrum, and it was really positive language being used, and that language and that kind of representation, it made me stop and go, oh, yeah, okay, I've never heard someone describe that before. I think that's kind of how I feel about myself. And, that near 30 seconds of someone describing their bisexuality in that show completely changed the trajectory of my life. So I'm very passionate about role models and visibility, and particularly when we then look into the workplace. So as I said, grew up in regional Queensland. I ended up moving to Melbourne, and I hear this story a lot of queer folks who do grow up in regional areas and smaller country towns where they don't feel like they belong, they don't feel like they have that representation or visibility, having to move away from that to find themselves. And I certainly did find myself in Melbourne. It was the best thing I could have done for myself personally. At the time, I was working for a smaller financial institution, and I was still early on in my career, and I wasn't out at work. I was still I knew that I was bisexual, and that was the terminology that I was using. And I was out to, a small group of friends, and I'm very lucky to have a supportive family as well, but I certainly wasn't out in the workplace. I was the youngest in my team by a good 20 years, and the rest of my team were middle-aged, cis, het, white men. And I'm sure that I can see Mags nodding. We can kind of see where this story is going. And the types of, I guess, commentary and jokes that I would hear them make about, I hadn't kind of gone through my non-binary journey at the time, but the commentary I'd hear about women, about LGBTQ folks, that casual racism and things like that, I certainly did not feel safe to talk about what I did on my weekend. At the time, I had a partner who was a woman, and I was like, well, I certainly don't feel comfortable being able to share what I did for that fear of not being supported or being made fun of and things like that. At the time, I was also not aware that I had ADHD. So I was undiagnosed with ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed until my mid-20s. I'm in my early 30s now, and also dealing with depression and anxiety, which has been an ongoing thing in my life as well. So all of these compounding factors had a huge impact on my mental health and well-being. Not feeling like I could be in that psychological safe space in that workplace had an impact then on my productivity and my engagement and just my ability to come into work every day and have a conversation with my colleagues about what I did on the weekend. I became very closed off, very withdrawn. And for most people who know me, that is not my personality or how I interact. You can see I'm talking with my hands constantly through here. So certainly, not my usual persona. I got to a point where I was like, look, I can't work in this space anymore. It's causing, irreparable damage to my mental health and well-being. So I left that organization and I started working at QBE Insurance. And because I'd been through what I'd been through in that previous workplace, I didn't feel supported. I had kind of reached a point where I'm like, I don't want to have to hide who I am anymore and have to, go through that masking. I still remember, and I tell the story all the time, and folks who are on the session today have probably heard this, but it is one of my favorite stories to tell. So First day at QBE, I've spent, half the day trying to get my login sorted. We've all been there through IT mags. Again, you work in that space, you get it. Once I was finally able to log in, I went on to the intranet homepage, and one of the very first things that I saw was the QBE Pride rainbow logo advertising QBE's LGBTQ employee network. And I remember sitting at my desk in that office and seeing that logo, and it's, size of a 50-cent piece, maybe just a very small rainbow logo on that homepage. And I saw that and I went, oh, okay. And I felt this weight lift from my shoulders. I felt that sense of I was seen in that workplace, that, this was going to be very different to my last workplace, and that I was included in that. And again, seeing that logo completely changed the trajectory of my life. I started at QBE in 2017 when the marriage equality plebiscite was happening. So there was certainly a lot of engagement and support around that as well. I got involved with the network. I somehow kind of fell into becoming one of the co-chairs of the network. I tend to fall into a lot of things that I do. That's just what happens. But again, completely changed my life. We QBE were members and still are members of Pride and Diversity, and was fortunate to work with the team there. And one thing led to another, and here I am on the other side in my role at Pride and Diversity. But I guess my kind of key takeaways from that is to never underestimate the power of visibility. That, as I said, that small rainbow logo completely changed my life. And we want to be able to see that visibility in our workplaces. So whether it's the physical signs of visibility, your logo is wearing a rainbow lanyard, having your pronouns on Zoom like we all do today, that has such an impact on people's lives. And conversations like this one today and those signs of visibility, it doesn't just change people's lives, it can save people's lives in a lot of instances. I don't want to talk around too many heavy stats or data today, but you only need to look in the media to see the discussions that are happening around the trans community, particularly trans women. And we can't escape that. We can't just, switch off from that type of commentary that we see on social media, because it does come through into our workplaces. So my kind of, takeaways for folks joining today is really to have an understanding of what is being said outside of the workplace. We saw that certainly with the marriage equality plebiscite and the support that Corporate Australia showed in that. I personally don't think that we would have done as well as we did if we didn't have corporate support from so many senior leaders standing up and being able to say, hey, we support LGBTQ inclusion, we support our LGBTQ employees. This is something that we need to stand up and be visible about. My other takeaway would be and similar to both what Adam and Mags have said, is to actually listen to folks. And, we talk about the LGBTQ community, but there is so much diversity within our community. And, I certainly don't talk for, on behalf of the LGBTQ community. I only have my own lived experience, but I think really creating these spaces for folks to engage and to really, discover themselves within their workplaces. The power of employee networks is so important. And similar to what Adam was talking about before, being able to provide funding and having a plan and a strategy around that. At Pride and Diversity, some folks may be aware that we are the custodians of something called the Australian Workplace Equality Index, or the AWEI, which is a benchmarking tool for LGBTQ inclusion. So we have that already for you. I'm more than happy to connect with anyone after this session to have those conversations and look at how we can support you. But we're not asking people to reinvent the wheel, but it's about, you can't do this without having that strategy and plan in place. Strategy and planning is one thing, but also making sure that you are listening to people and utilising people's lived experiences, but also making sure that they are being supported as well. I believe that is my time, but again, very grateful for everyone joining today. I'm more than happy to connect with anyone post this session. I'm sure that details can be shared around, but again, very grateful to everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for what is a very personal experience that has been shared. And I think, I can only echo that as well. It's the small things that really do make the difference. So externalizing, representation is one thing, but just those small things to open a web page or see internally and appreciate that where you are is a safe space makes such a difference. So thank you. I'm now going to pass over to somebody who has worked with Aquent for many years, and I'm very glad that we finally have her on a panel. So Di, I am going to hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Monique. And good afternoon, everybody. I see the clock's just turned, so it's just after 12. Monique introduced me and she said Di, but for some of you that may know me, I'm Diane. I have black curly hair, brown eyes, and I wear a symbol of my ethnic background, a red dot on my forehead that signifies I'm a married woman. I'm wearing a bright pink dress and glasses, and my pronouns are she and her. I greet you today from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, known as modern-day Sydney, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future, as they hold the traditions, the dreams, and memories of Australia's First Nations people. So today I'm here to join the conversation and share a bit of my story as a culturally and linguistically diverse woman. I'm so pleased that Aquent is actually making space to have this conversation, and I thank you for having me. Now, I've been introduced as Diane Moodley. You would have seen in much of the literature, right? However, it is Dinah-Dee Moodley that pays taxes in Australia and checks in at the local RSL on the weekend. And so here's how it started. I grew up in a middle-class Indian family in a small town called Stanger on the eastern shores of South Africa. I'm the eldest of 3 children. Like both my parents, who grew up under apartheid, so did I. Under apartheid, I was only allowed to mingle with people of my own race. So think about that for a second. I had to attend an all-Indian school, live within an Indian community, could only visit social settings like beaches and restaurants for non-white people, and all of this was governed by the law of the day. Back then, many believed that what you can't see, you can't be. So when I went to university, which was mixed race and historically white, I adopted the name Diane, thinking that it would be easier to pronounce and spell. So in sharing my story with you today, I'm hoping to share with you a couple of tips on how I have coped over the years. And I'm really hoping that you'll be able to take away at least 3 points in terms of what you can do to improve someone else's experience. So I joined Deloitte South Africa as a chartered accountant. And when I think about my time at Deloitte in South Africa, I think the biggest impact on my lived experience was having a good mentor. I did not know what a mentor was as a young graduate. And now on reflection, I have the fondest memories of one of the senior partners being my self-appointed mentor. He provided insights from his experience in the corporate world. He acted as a sounding board and helped build my confidence. His empathy and guidance in those early career years helped me to navigate the corporate world and also set me up for my next chapter. For those of you on the call that have the experience and opportunity to share, do consider becoming a mentor, because it's such an opportunity to make a difference in someone's career trajectory. And so that would be my first tip to those of you that are on the call. I'd experienced the world outside South Africa through travel, and the idea of working overseas was an opportunity I welcomed. So 21 years ago, I accepted a secondment to Sydney. I got to Sydney and soon worked out that the leaders in professional services in Australia were mostly white male. It was a real eye-opener. Remember, what you can't see, you can't be. I doubted myself and my ability. I felt out of my depth and experienced imposter syndrome big time, and it was affecting my mental health. This was the catalyst for me to leave employment and set up an accounting practice. My years as an entrepreneur were some of the best and most courageous times of my life. that led me to start my personal journey into technology. The experience of building multiple businesses gave me the opportunity to share my experiences with young girls in high school, women looking to return to the workforce, and currently I'm mentoring a final year student from Rwanda. It was around this time that I was approached to join PwC. My work was disrupting the status quo of professional services, and as a woman leading this change amongst a leadership of men, it was confronting. I struggled with being taken seriously and was just not able to connect with a certain group of white males. This is when my first introduction to allyship. An ally is often defined as someone who's not a member of a marginalized group, but wants to support and take action to help others in that group. Having an ally helped me not only cope, but excel, and I was listed as a top 50 women in accounting globally for 2 years. This recognition of my work in the industry boosted my confidence as a culturally and linguistically diverse woman. And so I ask each of you to consider how you might be an ally to someone in your network. Last year, I found myself an empty nester of sorts, with my second son finishing high school. It was at this time that I made the courageous decision to leave the profession and join Microsoft. 6 months into role, I found myself reflecting on 4 statements as part of an inclusion activity. And a word of caution, as they may be confronting, and I ask you too to consider them. Firstly, I feel confident to express the race or ethnic traditions associated with my origins. 2, I speak up in group discussions as I'm not concerned that my accent or language proficiency hinders conversation. 3, I have always been part of the social group of my choice without having apprehensions of my racial or ethnic associations. And 4, I can choose to wear a symbol of my ethnic background in my workplace without it being called out. I'm going to pause there for a second. Even now, it takes me by surprise. As I reflected on those statements, it hit home that I was covering. Covering is a strategy through which an individual downplays a known stigmatized identity to blend into mainstream. It can be based on appearance, affiliation, advocacy, or association. This realization had a profound effect on me growing up in apartheid South Africa. I still carried the baggage of being non-white. I'd thrown myself into my career and focused on being a woman at work, so much so that I'd shied away from my Indian heritage. So as the days followed, a part of me felt liberated, and slowly I started recognizing all the little habits that I had adopted as part of covering. One that's very visible is that for the last 30 years or so, I have straightened my hair to conform to looking a certain way. Today, I'm proud to come to you as an Indian curly girl, as a reflection of who I am. And if I do decide to straighten my hair, it'll be because I want to and not because I feel the need to conform. My ask of you today is to reflect on whether you are covering and why. Or do you know someone who might be covering, and consider how you might support them. It's been such an opportunity to share my story with you, and I'd like to say a very big thank you for your time, and thanks also to the wonderful team at Aequint for the opportunity to share. Thanks, Monique.
Thank you so much. And I still remember our first conversation where you said to me, I don't think I have a story. And we sat down and I listened, and it gave me goosebumps. And I think there will be so many people today who see this live or through a recording that will resonate with that. So thank you so much for sharing such an honest and personal experience. So last but certainly not least is again somebody who Aequint have known and worked with for many years. I am now going to hand over to Nikhil, who will be supported by our Auslan interpreters to now talk to his lived experience.
Just making sure that our interpreter can see okay. Thank you, Aequint team, for allowing me to present today in regards to my personal experience as a deaf person with digital technology in the organisation that I work for. Now, my name is Nikhil Bora, and my pronouns are he, him. I am deaf, and I use Auslan, as you can see. I'm based in Naarm, Melbourne, and first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Wathaurong people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land where I live, learn, and work. I honour and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future. Now, I work as an experienced designer at ANZX. Okay, now my story. I was born in Malaysia. Growing up, I was very, very excited, but unfortunately, my world changed. I lost my hearing when I was 2 years of age through a really bad illness called meningitis. That was in the mid-1980s. I was also introduced to the cochlear implant, and I became the 10th commercial pediatric recipient in the world to receive the cochlear implant out of 500,000. Now, fast forward. I moved from a smaller surf coast country for the beginning of my career in a bigger city, Melbourne, which was really exciting for me. I have experienced many barriers, though, in my career journey. 3 of these barriers include ableism, isolation, and rejection. And of these three major discriminations, they're still recurring today. Historically, inclusion and equity has not been what it is today, yet it still has a long way to go. It's on the improve. Many people don't understand the challenges faced by those with a disability or by deaf people. Now, I started applying for various jobs in Melbourne, and I put down DEAF, deaf, so that people would know. I would constantly receive so many rejections. I asked for feedback, I would get no feedback. I thought, oh my goodness. Then I decided to remove the word deaf from my CV and cover letters. Companies would call my parents, not me, but they'll call my parents, they'll call the employment consultant, who would in turn let them know that I was deaf, and I would still be rejected for interviews. That's quite offensive. Most of the companies are hesitant or frightened of hiring people with a disability due to the costs, the work quality, and maybe even their life experiences. I almost gave up on my dream to become a designer. I thought it was a waste of time. One day, I saw a well-known creative director status message on Twitter. I was in with a chance. I replied to a job opportunity at their small branding studio. Luckily, he was welcoming, and I joined their team. And they offered me a job, which was perfect. After that, everything was going really well. So I moved to a well-known visual effect company. Unfortunately, it was very toxic. It was cutthroat. The communication was challenging. There were so many barriers that I came across. I didn't understand the workplace culture because I couldn't have access to it. And it wasn't really good for me. It wasn't a great time for me. I coped and I kept heading down. I kept my head down and continued to focus on my work. Now, I was constantly excluded from meetings, from lunch outings, from social opportunities. I missed out on so much information, incidental information, that could have provided me with important context for my job. They would talk about deadlines and various briefs and clarify important information in my absence. They yelled at me, they bullied me in front of other people, and I was really put behind. They used outdated technology for my communication, which was insufficient. And then they didn't even engage with me. I was frustrated and fed up with that role, and my mental health wasn't great. So I thought, nah, do I give up? Or do I find a mentor, somebody with a disability that can support me through this? So I asked for assistance, and I got a lot of coaching, mentoring, and I felt a lot better. I was really confident with myself. I felt like I was empowered, which was great. So then I moved to a smaller web organization. They had a better understanding of the needs of deaf people. But they said that I need to organize my own interpreters. And I was still open and I was still often left without access. So I book interpreters for large group meetings, which popped up every now and then. But most of the time, I felt like I was excluded from most of the communications throughout the day. I experienced the same challenges with isolation, ableism, missed out on a lot of meetings and things like that through lunch. I advocated for myself, and I had to let them know that I would like to attend lunch and have discussions with you. Are we able to do that? And I said, you need to make sure that I can be included. And so I spoke to HR in regards to that, to see if it was okay for me to have that access, and so I could be empowered. That company that I was working with were fantastic. I taught them Auslan. I enjoyed interacting with the staff members that I was working with. I really enjoyed my time there. But they moved to, then I moved to a bigger organization called Telstra, which was a much better environment for me. It was a fantastic company because it was diverse, inclusive. They opened the door for me. They provided me full access to everything that I needed, and I was able to get my ideas across and contribute to meetings. I felt like I was welcome. And this helped me progress and move upwards in my career, which was a great experience. And it was really good to have that quality of communication. And the digital area was really, really, really good for me too, for all of the experience that I had. So at that time I was working, it was a challenge with the communication because none of them were deaf. I was the only deaf person there. I had to rely on a lot of lip reading, and sometimes you would have interpreters that would come in ad hoc. We had employment assistance funds, but that's not enough for a year, and it runs out really quickly. So if they're going to have meetings and things like that, they need to provide an interpreter. So therefore I need to speak up about that. So if there's one person there that helped me with that. She was noticing things. She noticed that I was struggling sometimes. There were these various interpreters that were coming in, and she asked, why are there different interpreters coming in? And I said, because there's not many interpreters that are available to interpret for me. And then she asked the question, and she said, why not have an in-house interpreter? And that person understood my position and empathized with me. And I said, yes, absolutely. That would be really good if we could have an in-house interpreter. And they said, I can support you to speak to your manager if you want to talk about that. And I didn't really want to, fight for that because I was really exhausted. So this particular person fought on my behalf. That's the allyship that I'm looking for, the empathy that I need. And fortunately, at ANZ, I now have an Auslan interpreter in-house, whereas previously I didn't. And it's so much better for me. The communication's instant. I can chat, I can socialize with my peers. And I feel like I'm, what do you say? I feel like it's really positive. I feel really safe. And also they notice that there's a lot of growth in me having the interpreter there. So looking back 10 years ago, all of the barriers that I came across, I just wish my colleagues at that time had the information in regards to access. Because if they ask me to attend meetings, I'm like, well, how am I going to access your meetings? I don't mean to be rude to say no. And I don't want to feel like I'm being offensive by not attending these meetings, but also at the same time, I need to support them. So they need to understand the access needs that I need to be able to access their information. In the past, they didn't understand that. They didn't have that concept. Yeah, they just didn't understand it. So now I'm a presenter. I have experience with various companies. People in the workplace learn about deaf culture, some science, and I have access to all of that, and they have access to me and my needs. So my story demonstrates a few important steps for employers. I think it's really important to listen to your staff, have a bit of patience. Notice that if they're struggling, ask them how you can assist them in the workplace, and the workplace will be much happier for them. When they ask for an in-house interpreter for me, that's an example that I want to see happen out there. Your organization and your productivity would go such a long way if you provided a safe space for everybody, because it benefits everyone in the long run. And also it helps with the team morale. Thank you so much for your time and watching today.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. It's, again, disappointing, isn't it, in some instances when you hear access and basic needs aren't supported. And I guess that's why we wanted to share these stories today. You know, we wanted to encourage organizations to look internally and take away the tokenistic and really see from a genuine representation and support network how you can do things differently. So on behalf of everybody at AQuint, I really want to thank each and every one of our panelists today for sharing your stories, for being vulnerable, for being honest, and for being genuine. It really does make a difference. And we are now going to open the Q&A doors, and I would really encourage anybody out there, no question is off the table. Our panelists are very, very open to answering anything. And obviously the goal today is to really help organizations look internally and see how they can create and enable safe spaces for people. So in order to make this a lot more accessible, I won't ask multiple panelists to answer questions because of the interpretation. So we will just take Q&As and position it to a panelist. If you would like your question answered by somebody specific, please feel free to highlight them as well. We do have one question who has already appeared in the Q&A box. So this question is from Chris. He has written, as a company owner and mentor to many design thinking practitioners in Australia, I was curious about the diversity and representation on this call. As a white male, grown, not me, he put that, I'm wondering whether the majority of people like me aren't joining in, becoming allies, etc. So my question would be, how can we be better at getting these critically important messages out there? And how can people like me help? That is a fantastic question. I am going to ask Diane, would you mind answering?
Sure, Monique, thank you for that. Yeah, I think, look, it's a really interesting question. So, Chris, you've obviously made made the attempt to join the conversation by joining us this morning. And so this I think brings to the forefront an interesting concept, right? You actually afforded yourself this opportunity to join the conversation. So in other words, you decided to join the call. Whereas I think when we look at organizations, for me in particular, I think it comes from the leadership, it comes from the top. So I guess if the leaders, or you for yourself as a leader of an organization, right, if you feel strongly enough about this topic and making a valuable contribution, then I would implore you to actually lean in on the other leaders within your network and within your circle to actually start that conversation and encourage them to, contribute and attend these sorts of events. So the first one, I guess, is really to encourage others to contribute and influence the conversation. The second, I think, as well, is if you have the ability, is to actually share the knowledge. So it's really getting people to understand the plight of others, to express the empathy, to listen, because it's only when we, sort of educate people and share our experiences, will we encourage people to actually improve. And then, of course, the third one, I guess, is, just in terms of you yourself being a mentor, being an ally. Because again, like I said before, what you can't see, you can't be. So if you, in some respects, are a bit of a role model for the other men out there, I think that would go a long way in creating an impact. Thanks, Monique.
Thank you. We also had some questions that were sent prior to the event, so I may pop in and out. So if you see my eyes going back and forth, that's what it is. So we do have a question from Amir. So he has written some amazing and touching stories shared here. As they were quite personal, I wanted to know if the panelists feel comfortable if this reading was accessible to attendees to be shared with outside of organizations. I won't answer on behalf of you all. Hopefully, you are more than comfortable. Yep. Okay.
From Nikhil.
Perfect. We're getting some nods, some thumbs up. So yes, and I think our goal is we will be sending this recording to everybody who attended today and to those people who also missed the event. Our goal is to spread awareness. So please, with the panelists' consent, please do feel free to share this with the wider teams or anybody else who you think may be interested. Okay, here we go. This is an anonymous question, apologize. So I deeply believe in accepting and listening to all and valuing diversity across my whole life and work. I do struggle, however, with the sexuality aspect. Can sexuality remain private? What does it have to do with your work capacity and brought experience to the role? it really should be a non-issue if there is true inclusion and respecting all. And this is a genuine question. Thank you. That's a very brave and honest question in the panel there. I am going to select and choose Ellie, if I may.
For sure. And absolutely sexuality can remain private. But I think when we look at workplaces, and you would have heard my lived experience earlier about not feeling safe enough to, be out about my sexual orientation. We at Pride University, we do a lot of research and surveying as well. And we have so much data that looks at when people are out in the workplace, just how much their productivity, their engagement, their innovation increases through that work, through, being out and not having to hide who you are. The toll that, having to hide who you are, those mental health impacts, they can be really quite serious. And as I said, that's something that I've been through before. And I know that a lot of other LGBTQ folks as well. But again, it certainly can, remain private if someone, wants to. But I think, by being able to be open and to be yourself and not feeling that fear. And Diane, you mentioned before about that covering, whether you're covering or self-editing or masking, that has a huge impact on someone's ability just to come in and to do their work and that team engagement and cohesion as well. I agree with the fact that it really should be a non-issue if there is true inclusion. But I think as well, we're not quite there yet. I think we are still definitely on that journey. There is still so much work to be done in workplaces around achieving true inclusion. And I'd also, get people to reflect on what does true inclusion actually look like. I don't think there's an end, kind of checklist that we are going to have when it comes to true inclusion. I think, we're certainly on that journey to, making workplaces safer and more accessible for folks. But I honestly don't know what true inclusion looks like and whether, that can always be measured. We look at kind of best practice through benchmarking and things like that as well. But I think, true inclusion, what does that actually mean? So that would be something else to consider, I think. But again, it certainly is a very deeply personal experience for folks, but I think as well looking at the mental health and the really quite serious psychological issues that the LGBTQ community faces by not being out in the workplace. And when we do provide those safe spaces, just the life-changing impact that can have on people.
Thank you so much, Ellie. We have another great question. This one is also anonymous. What are some of the policies and procedures businesses should prioritize reviewing in order to support diverse communities? I'm going to throw this one to Mags, if I may. Oh, Mags, you're muted still. Zoom does not like you.
No, it doesn't like me at all. There is this in and out aspect of, as I said, inward focusing, which is the policies and procedures for the employees versus the policies and procedures for customers that they are working with. So I think that's one of the first things to look at, which is we need to cover both. When it comes to employees, it's inclusion. When it comes to how do we work together, no bullying. There are all those sorts of procedures which need to be done internally on how the organisation works and make sure that it is inclusive, as well as recruitment and reviewing work like performance reviews. So there's a whole aspect of HR that we need to look at, as well as how do we actually work together. We have the external then, which is how do we actually ensure that the customers and the users that we are working with are also being made sure that we're supporting those diverse communities. And if I just take a very small example, which is I have two elderly parents. My father knows how to use a phone, but he broke down and he couldn't contact RACV because he didn't know which button to press. We are going at the most basic level now of inclusion, which didn't work for a man who knew how to use a phone, but didn't know how to actually go through an IVR. So we're looking at how we're going to be supporting everyone. And I'm taking, a white Irishman who actually didn't have a large amount of education into everyone who needs to have that support.
Thank you. Another great question that's come through. So what are the most effective ways to make a case for DE&I? How can DE&I be a priority for organizations who have other issues to deal with as well? Things like recessions and large-scale restructures. Adam, I know when we had some conversations, there were some great ideas from yourself. Would you be comfortable answering this?
Yeah, look, I think it goes back to what I was saying originally. I'm like, you can, just because you put out one strategy or one policy over here and you put it in the cabinet and you close the cabinet, and it's like, great, we have it. It's not how you do things. I think sometimes the idea within leadership teams is just because you make a policy and you promote it, when it comes out, it's all going to be sunshine, lollipops, rainbows, and waterfalls. Well, it's not the case. You actually have to live and breathe the policy. And I think even if companies are facing restructures, they're facing really tough economic times, which we all are, just coming up hot on the heels of COVID and now, looking towards a recession, hopefully not, but it's going that way. It really kind of reiterates the whole idea that you have to act within your means, and small things, small tangible actions and policies and culture elements within the organization, people, hiring more First Nations people. I'm speaking from a First Nations point of view, but obviously the LGBTQI community, all the communities we're talking about within this call, all makes a difference, because if you hire the right people that have this in mind, then it doesn't matter if you don't have much, or it doesn't matter if you're going through restructure. It's just done as a part of the process, because these people have it in the front of their minds. So that's the strength of having a multicultural, workplace, that they use LGBTQI contributions and employees, whatever marginalized community we're talking about, diversity is the key, right? Because it strengthens the fabric of the organization.
Fantastic, thank you. Nikhil, I'm going to come to you. So Wendy and Mark, just so you guys are ready. What are some tips that you have on making the hiring process more inclusive? There's also a small PS here to say that all of you panelists have been amazing, so I needed to flag that.
Thank you. What a great question. So a good tip how you could work out the hiring process to have the right people. First of all, you need to understand people's disabilities and the diversity within disabilities. So what sort of accommodations you need to do to support that. And that starts right at the start from the interview process. For example, an Auslan interpreter, a wheelchair user. So you need to think of the environment that they will need. And you need to ask the people that apply for these roles, ask them and just be very open. I think that's really important, to be open and honest and ask first without making assumptions.
Thank you, Nikhil. Okay, so we have another question, which is developing a diversity, equality and inclusion plan in each organization is never going to be a one-size-fits-all. How do you propose we go about it? And where do we learn more about true diversity leadership? Thank you. Ellie, I'm going to come to you if that's okay.
Thanks, Monique, and really great question. I mean, to start with is you just do it. I think, you know, if you don't have that plan in place, you obviously need to do it. But I think I mentioned before is we're not asking people to reinvent the wheel with, you know, DE&I and strategies and plans and stuff. You know, obviously organizations like Pride and Diversity exist. Please partner with us, you know, happy to have those conversations. But then you also have other organizations like AND, the Australian Network on Disability, DCA, the Diversity Council of Australia. There is, you know, professional support available there to you from more of that strategy and planning aspect. But I think as well, you need to make sure that you are consulting with the people that you are building this strategy and plan for. It's very easy to kind of whack a few goals and actions on a plan and go, yep, here you go. But if that is not what your people need or have asked for, then it's absolutely pointless. So really making sure that you spend the time to consult properly with those many diverse voices within your organizations, making sure that you consult with subject matter experts within those areas as well, and making sure that, you know, whether it's your own staff or the subject matter experts externally that you are engaging with, that you are paying them for their time and their knowledge and their efforts. I believe there's another question coming up around that, particularly around engaging with First Nations people as well. But making sure that you are really engaging and consulting with those communities. You're doing it in whether it's culturally appropriate and sensitive ways, but also making sure that you are acknowledging those lived experiences of those many diverse voices that you are engaging with. Sorry, and then the second part to that was around the true diversity leadership. I'll just touch on that briefly as well. So again, there's many organizations out there across different diversities that do focus on leadership. So there is Out Leadership based in the US, but also has a presence here in Australia around LGBTQ leadership. But similar to, I think, Chris's question before around that allyship is we're needing to see those allies step up around that leadership as well. And, you know, we talk about it from continuing those conversations and you know, building that into, you know, your work plans and strategies and things like that. But I think as well, you're always going to be able to find a personal reason to be an ally. So whether you have a friend, a family member, a colleague who is LGBTQ or they're First Nations or they're a refugee or whatever that diversity might be, being able to use that personal story as part of your allyship. You can use this session today as that first starting point in continuing those conversations. But I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. There is a question, Adam, for yourself. So do you get frustrated with the amount of emotional labor and work people expect you to do just because you're First Nations? And how can businesses properly fund training to support initiatives like the RAP?
Sorry, what was that second bit? I just didn't hear that.
How can businesses properly fund training to support initiatives like a RAP?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks for the question. The first part of that question, yes, it's very frustrating. Look, I mean, it's hard because you expect a certain amount of, what's the word? You expect people coming into the conversation to know what they're talking about, know what, you know, have a basic kind of understanding, but some people really have literally zero understanding, literally have never met a First Nations person. Would you believe in 2023, I see it a lot. And it's hard, it is quite hard because, you know, like we obviously are operating on quite a high level in what we're doing. Complexity of culture, etc., is something we deal with daily. But really that, you know, that kind of subsection of Australian society that don't know anything is part of that complexity as well. And it's part of, I guess, being a First Nations person in a non-First Nations workplace. Like even though SBS has an RTV, which has about 60 First Nations people, it's still overwhelmingly non-Indigenous. And actually it's got many different cultures being SBS, right? And that's a great thing. But with it comes all these strange cultural back and forths daily almost, which are great, really interesting, but it can be frustrating sometimes. But it's part of, like, some people get very, very angry to the point where they get standoffish, and First Nations people, I mean, I'm not like that as much. I just get frustrated and kind of just silently. But you know, it's fine. Like it's all a part of bridging that gap. And like I said, we're at a pointy point in Australian society right now, where there's a convergence between Australian business, Australian, culture and First Nations culture, and it becoming one. And that's a really nice place to be if you actually take a step back away from the emotion and take a look at it. So I try and see it in a positive light. The second part of that question, look, I mean, you just have to plan. I can't say it any clearer than you just have to find the money and plan. If you can't find the money and plan, then why are you doing it? Like, seriously. And like I said, it doesn't take much to write a policy that's well informed. It actually doesn't. It doesn't take much to look at what you're doing and saying, what can we do, as opposed to creating these really lofty goals that are too high up that are just going to disappoint everyone involved. I think you have to be realistic. To my earlier point, you have to engage Indigenous people the right way. And again, like, I think that isn't very hard. It's just a lot of listening and research. And I think you can get there. You just have to use your positive intentions as a starting block, get a group of people like-minded around you in the organization, big or small, and then execute. Hope that made sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've got a couple of more questions that I'll direct. So Diane, if you wouldn't mind, we've got one here, which is, what is or was the driving force for you to keep going, even when things were or are in many places not in your favor?
Wow. I think I'd have to attribute that to just the way I was brought up, Monique, when I think about it. My parents were truly advocates, I guess, of education in all respects, and they instilled in us as children, I guess, a growth mindset. So I think just inherently, I'm that kind of like a glass half full type of person. And so for me, we talk of areas of development. I see all of those as an opportunity. And so I think that's kind of spurred me on. Being absolutely transparent. I mean, there have been times where I've actually sat back and gone, what am I actually doing? And why? Or am I trying to prove something to someone else? But I guess when it comes down to it, right, there's also an element of wanting to create an impact, wanting to be a role model for others, having the ability to have or influence others through my behavior. And of course, what we're doing today, right? The sharing, the ability to know that even if I've impacted one other individual today, then it's a day well spent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have one question that's left, which is working quite nicely from the timing gods above us. So this question is, how can some organizations, particularly at a team level, genuinely embrace DE&I in the workplace? They can all say we do RAP, inclusion plans, etc. And it comes down to box ticking. But at a micro level, leaders don't want to walk the walk and talk the talk, as DE&I is seldom the bottom line measured or just a KPI. It comes down to revenue and deadlines. So Mags, I might throw this one open to you as a designer, where I think it's very important to include design. And obviously, this is a big part of it, right in the forefront of the process.
Yeah, if I sit there and say, don't walk the walk and talk the talk, there's two things to think about. One is that it's all about personal experience, and people won't advocate if they can't see it. So back into what Deanna has been saying. But also, and this is where I want to talk about, is, are you actually connecting into the value? If it is talking about revenue and deadlines, then the value that these people are interested in is, can we make more money? And there is actually real information which says if we are more inclusive and we have more different people, we will make more money. So there's that aspect is there. The second one is the personal relationship with that leader. So if you as a team are sitting there and saying, we want to do more of this and this isn't working, it has to be the personal relationship with that leader which says, this is important to us. This is what the difference will be. This is what we're willing to do. We need you to do the same. And that's actually an incredibly hard conversation to have because people will feel like they're being ganged up on. So that is the one-to-one relationship conversation that you have. It has to be one-to-one. It can't be within the rest of the group, and it has to be a journey that you are taking those people through. And unfortunately, and I think I've said this, which is, yes, we do have to advocate ourselves. We do have to go through the journey. And yes, it is hard sometimes.
Thank you very much, Mags. Well, that has left us with 4 minutes. So that gives me enough time today to thank Nikhil, Adam, Mags, Ellie, Diane. Thank you so much for your time, not only for today, but spending time with me as a moderator before this event to get to know you, to get to understand your stories, and to stand here on a platform and share them with our customers, our clients, and many other people. So on behalf of Aequent, I would love to thank you all so very much. For everybody who has been watching the session and will watch this session, each of our panelists are very open to connecting with you as an audience. You can connect with them via LinkedIn and social media channels as well. So please do feel free to reach out. Diversity, inclusion, and equity is a big topic, and it is not something that everybody will get right, nor do you always know where to start. So we just wanted to use today's opportunity to start those conversations, to have real conversations, and give you access to people who are open to sharing their stories. We at Aequent are also here to connect with you. If we can't help, then we would love to connect you to somebody else in our network. So I'll take this opportunity once again to let you know that each of our fantastic panelists are representing a charity. So if you have enjoyed the session, if you have found it to be of value, please do feel free to give back. The links are in the chat group. Also, at the very end of today's session, there will be a short survey. It will also come out to you on email as well. Once again, we recognize we are not perfect, okay? So there will be things that we can do differently, that we could do better. So please do feel free to share that honest and genuine feedback. And if I could do nothing but leave you with one thought today, it took us over 3 months to organize this event with the technology, the panelists, the Auslan interpreters, and everything else. So the next time that you are in an organization that wants to call an all-company meeting an hour or a day before, please do feel free to challenge that inclusivity. Because I, for one, have been nervous and panicked and scared about how today would go. And I've had all the planning and preparation and support in the world. So please, the next time, think of a colleague, think of somebody in your team or within the wider business, and ask yourself, are we as inclusive as we can be? But thank you once again on behalf of everybody at Aequent for attending today's session.